today we're going to talk about the Alexa ecosystem and really find out if she is or will be, I mean, we're from the future, if she is or will be Skynet. So just what we're going to talk about today, we'll give you an introduction. I know that as Sarah Connor and the Terminator, we don't really need an introduction, but we'll tell you who we are. Then we'll talk about the hardware side. Then we'll go a little into the apps, both Kasa and Alexa. Then we'll go ahead and talk about some scripts and some great security information that we discovered. And then we'll take questions. So I'm Jessica. Briefly tell you my background that's pertinent to the portion I did, which is that I used to work in a forensics reverse engineering lab where all I did was hack into devices that needed hardware exploitation, so JTAG, chip off, etc. You'll know my fun fact here. I don't normally run, but I do run for data gen. So if last year you saw Brian Moran's talk at OSDF, those run times were mine, and they're sad. I asked him for a t-shirt, and all I got was a meme.
So my name is Brian. Most of you probably know me. If you don't, again, my name is Brian. Spent 13 years in the Air Force, which actually, honestly enough, Sarah Edwards did not know until last night that I was actually in the Air Force before, which just blew her mind, which is pretty awesome. You know, I've known Sarah for a long time, and somehow that blew her mind that I was in the military. So if you watched us on the forensic lunch about 3 or 4 weeks ago, you might have noticed that Alexa actually popped on during our talk, and Dave was actually talking to her. So I didn't have smooth jazz because I didn't actually have any music set up with my actual fake Amazon account. However, Dave can't be with us, but I wanted to go ahead and just capture the essence of all things that are Dave and smooth jazz. So that's my fun fact. So for this presentation, just to kind of go over what we did kind of hardware-wise and everything, we obviously had to use a bunch of phones, we get a bunch of Amazon devices, and we started to work through all of that. Our plan was actually to bring in iOS devices as well as looking at what the Amazon was actually working on releasing, which is going to be their new Echo Show next week. We're actually working on getting kind of all of that done together in one thing. However, the research that we did, unfortunately, was kind of halted because we found some pretty big security issues, which we're going to talk about here in a bit. So this is still ongoing. This is still, you know, this is just kind of scraping the surface with the stuff that we found. So kind of how we got here, last year, if you remember, we had a kind of a competition for who could get the most tweets. Adrian brought up that he wanted to actually get one of the Echoes that was given away so he could do chip off on it. So that kind of spurred some initial thoughts, and how I actually ended up with the smart home stuff is I have a light that is right by our couch on our split level house, and for the longest time I had to stand up on the couch to turn off the light. Well, I didn't want to be the guy who was drunk one night, turning off the light and fell over the steps. So I was like, you know, I'm just going to get an Alexa and just tell her to do that so that way I don't have to worry about falling over the balcony one night when I've been drinking. And then that kind of spurred everything on. It's like, you know, I wonder how much data is actually here and how much it's storing and everything like that. So that's kind of the backstory of how we got here full circle a year later with generating all this data and going through all of our stuff.
So we're going to start with what we're going to do as far as the Amazon Echo devices and what I like to call the ecosystem. When we had
patent pending.
When we had the opportunity to talk to Amazon, they didn't actually really care that much for the name. I thought it was like the only smart thing I've ever said in my life. So, we're going to talk about the Echo family. So one of the first things we're going to cover, one of the many sources of data that we're going to talk about today is the hardware itself. The Amazon Echo and the Echo Dot are the two that we look at. The Amazon Echo is the big one with the speaker included. The Dot, it relies on you having a Bluetooth speaker. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the apps, which are the sources of data. The Alexa as well as the Kasa app, which is used for some of the smart things. The Alexa app itself, there are skills that you can run also. That's also part of our future resource. Yep. We didn't get to test enough skills because of the security implications we ran into doing our testing. Then we're also going to talk about the network and the connected devices themselves. So the TP-Link network is the network that Brian is using, and here you'll see both a smart bulb as well as a smart outlet. So the question I had was, I was doing the hardware side, and it was, how the heck am I going to get the data off this device, right? And when you're looking at hardware, you're going to look for a couple things. You're going to look for ports, data entry points, right? And you're going to go, am I going to go destructive or non-destructive? The goal is to get a non-destructive method so that you can do it repeatably. so that law enforcement can use it if they have to turn back over the device. And it just saves you a lot of money in the end. But sometimes to get non-destructive, we have to get destructive first. So as far as ports, there is a USB on these devices. Is it rootable? Most likely. When I did get into the hardware, BusyBox and SuperUser are already on there. But that's not where I was going to start because I didn't even know that it was going to be FireOS at that point, right? So look for JTAG ports. There's none on the boards for either of these. No JTAG ports. Then identify the chip, at least on the regular Amazon. It's ISP-able because it's got an eMMC, so that's the route we're going to go. It's the quickest route for me with my background. Take the chip off, figure out the pinout, then I have a non-destructive method for the future. So this is the original Echo. It's very well documented as far as disassembly. It's actually great. This one actually came to me from a police department in West Virginia that they actually want some analysis on this for a case. And what's great is I don't have a chip-off station at home. I do have a full soldering station. I do have a lot of JTAG equipment, don't have a chip-off station. So I did go up to Teal Tech Canada, thank you guys, for allowing us, and I used their chip-off station. And since they knew I was going up there to do it, they actually procured their own Echo, put some test data on it, and took a chip off before I arrived. So the research on the original Echo, it's pretty easy, pretty clean. You'll see the chips here. It's a well-documented chip. It's a SanDisk chip, 4 gigs of memory, easily confined data sheets, and you can test to find the pinout. When we're doing ISP, 5 pins, VCC, VCCQ, command, clock, and DAT0. So here's your pinout. Might be hard to see in the back, but I don't think you're JTAGing in here or ISPing in here. So when you get home and you want to actually start reading off one of these devices, you'll be all set. It's pretty easy to wire up. I can use some nice normal gauge wire because they're test points. I can read this with 7.3x easy JTAG box, which is pretty cheap. So out we come a full 4 gig dump. So then I get to the dot, and I'm like, yes, it's going to be easy. Can't find any documentation about the actual components online. Crap. So I disassemble it, and you can see the 2 boards here. I knew that I had a new one out of the box, and I had 2 to work with from Brian's house. One which was on his test network, which does not have smooth jabs, and his second one which was actually in use in his home for a year, so chock full of data. So we have a couple of different components on here, and the problem is on 2 of the different Echoes I looked at, so the one from his test network and the one I had bought, which were both purchased around the same time, different chips, different markings, same BGA pattern, because it's the same exact board. The board markings were the same, but no documentation on either. Now, I'm pretty good at finding data sheets. I did it for a really long time on boards of unknown origin. No dice here. So the challenge was no data sheets, but I was starting with the assumption that this was an eMMC, because the other one was. So I said I'm going to take chip off. This is my favorite picture in the world, because that's actually me chipping off. And if you notice, the best piece of equipment there is a chopstick. It means that every time I do a chip off, I have Chinese for lunch first. So, so I took the new one out of the box. It didn't have data, and went ahead and took the chip off so that we could determine the actual ISP, so that we'd have a method for people to pull data off later. So this is an IR chip-off machine. It was my first time using an IR instead of a heat top bottom. It was pretty dope. You have to wear sunglasses when you do it so you don't get blinded. And it makes cool pictures. So clean and read the chip, and then went on to determine the pinout, which was a little bit difficult because that section in blue, I'm going to show it to you closer, that's actually where I have to go on the components. There are no test ports. Those TPs on the other board, which are nice and easy to solder to, they don't exist. So I need to find all 5 pins. I go ahead and I do. Here's a close-up of the board. What might be a little difficult to see here is that every single one of these places I have to solder to now are on the edges of onboard caps and resistors. Beige ones are caps, black ones are resistors. Had to find the right sides of them, shoot the pin out, and then solder onto them with 40 thousandths wire. Which, what did that mean? It meant I bought myself a brand new $500 soldering iron because I couldn't do it with my other one, which was cool, and yeah. It's a really good soldering iron. It gets hot like that, and then it cools off immediately at tips. All right, so I image it with RIF2. RIF2 has no trouble imaging this. We now have a non-destructive method. I can go ahead and start ripping data off of Brian's. So I do. I get a dump. Anyone know what operating system that is? Come on, it's Amazon. It's FireOS. All right, so what data do we find on the hardware that we can't find anywhere else? We actually can get the Wi-Fi connections, Mac connections, registration information. But most of what I find on there is actually future use for Amazon. I can hear Alexa talking in all her different voices, in different languages, etc. So then we go on to the apps. And what is Alexa? Alexa is the app or the virtual assistant for Amazon, and a common woman's name. So Amazon is what you say when, Alexa is what you say when you're talking to your Amazon Echo. And you can do lots of things with the Echo device, everything from ordering things from Amazon to asking questions to newer features, which we'll talk about soon. So you can also view the other devices you have on there. You can control what's playing on a device. And in May 2017, while we were doing all of our research, they released the message and calling and other things for Amazon, which has a lot of user issues for the Amazon Echo device owners, which Brian's going to talk about. Now, it completely changed our research. I actually had to go back and go ahead and take data off of Brian's test unit. And so I carved for some audio files on there, and bing, I get everything he had recorded for a text message within the last 24 hours. It's freaking awesome, in his voice. So not just text. And so I'll hand this off to Brian to talk a little bit more about that side.
So now we're going to step away from the hardware side and kind of look at the application side specifically of the actual applications themselves. So as Jessica said, this calling and messaging stuff completely changed all of our research literally overnight. Like, it was really, really awesome because we were making good progress. Like, everything is going well, this is fantastic. And then they released this, and then we literally had to stop everything we were doing. We had issues. It's just like, why couldn't you have just done this after the summit? So we could have just done our work and then not had to just try to throw everything together as much as we could to try to get as much information as we can, which is actually why we have 100 slides that we're talking about today, and we probably have another 4 or 5 hours at least of content to talk about stuff that we can't talk about here, obviously, because there is just so much information that they've just continued to store. So one of the things that we noticed right off the bat is on the actual mobile application itself, there's very, very, very little data that actually stores on the device itself. Almost everything is actually pulled from the AWS cloud servers and then onto the device. So if you have the Alexa app open on your phone and you put it in airplane mode, you can't see anything anymore. It actually requires an active internet connection to pull that down, which is why it's almost impossible to find good information on the mobile device itself. So there are, however, some artifacts that are obviously stored. One is comms.db, which is actually a database. We know that it's a SQLite database. The data in the database looks like it is ridiculously encrypted with some kind of mechanism that I've never seen. And those of you who know my history, if I have a problem with encryption, it's actually probably implemented pretty well. So Amazon had the foresight to say, hey, if we're going to store some kind of actual application stuff with messaging on our devices, we're going to make sure that's encrypted and it's really, really hard to pull off, which is fantastic. However, as we're going to show you in a bit, you can actually make the queries to pull that information back down. It's just, if you're looking at just the mobile device itself, you're not going to get the full picture of what we're specifically looking for. One of the other spots that we saw that there was really, really good information was the map data storage. So in previous versions of the Alexa application, which is again why we're just stressing so much about all the new features and everything, is we try to stay up to date as much as possible with the actual information that we're presenting. We don't want to present on stuff from a year ago and just get up here and say that, oh, well, the Alexa, you can do the X, Y, and Z, and then somebody goes and does that in theory and turns out that is not the case at all. We want to try to give as actual pertinent information as we can. So in previous versions, which was obviously probably just map data storage without the B2, you could do things like pull some of the cookies down and actually use that to authenticate it and pull this information back. Amazon completely recognized that was a flaw by themselves and changed all of that. So if you see other talks or anything like that on Alexa, just make sure that the information is actually the most current information that's actually talking about the newest releases of the applications themselves. However, there is one very, very important thing that we can actually get from this database is the Amazon account ID string. This is going to be our essentially golden ticket to allow us to pull as much information as we can from these URLs to actually get information from the Amazon cloud about our actual Alexa application itself. So again, this is our string. This is actually a unique string for every single user. Every single Alexa user is going to have a uniquely generated string, and we're going to use this, append it to our URLs, and do a whole bunch of queries to get as much information as possible. So in order to do this, we're working on trying to create a way to automate this. Like I said, we're working towards that. We don't have a way to do it yet. So the easiest way is you have to actually log into the Alexa application from a web browser. This is going to allow a local cookie to be stored, which is going to allow these queries to happen. Again, we're working on a way to automate this, but for now, this is the only way that we've been able to find that actually doesn't violate the Amazon TOS, because we've been working pretty close with the Amazon security team. Like, the last thing we want to do is piss them off and do something that would essentially just cease communication between us, because they've been fantastic throughout this entire process. So one of the things that you'll notice when you browse there is there are more essentially options that you can choose from the web browser. But the one thing you can't do from the web browser is you don't see any of the calling and messaging stuff. And we're not exactly sure yet if that's actually just a feature they have not rolled to the mobile site, or if they're just focusing on the calling and messaging only being tied to mobile devices. And so far, it seems like that is actually probably the latter, because you can install the mobile application onto a tablet, but you can't make phone calls or send messages from a tablet. You can only do it from an actual cell phone. So as we were pulling through all of the data, collecting our network traffic, doing all that, one thing that we noticed a lot is we noticed this one particular URL showed up all the time. It's obviously pretty straightforward what it is when you look at it. It's like, oh, it's some kind of API call. Like, I bet I can actually work on getting information off because it has API in the URL. So in the event that you actually have one of these devices and you're doing an active investigation on it, like, that's probably a pretty good keyword to search for to try to figure out what URLs potentially is going to have information that you're specifically looking for. The one thing we will say is, because of the way that they changed it, you will need the actual account credentials from Amazon. So you can't just willy-nilly log in and grab anybody's stuff. You actually need the account credentials to pull all this information back. So again, for the law enforcement side, make sure you have that before you start doing all of the stuff we're about to show you what to do. So obviously, we have our unique identifier string. So if we just start adding some of the stuff to the URLs that we see, we can actually essentially start to build out our URLs, and now we can actually go ahead and pull the information back from Amazon. So if we just type that into the browser after we've logged in, we get nicely formatted JSON data, which is very, very easy to parse, and we can actually start to see the stuff that Amazon is already parsing in the application itself, but now we can pull all this data back from the cloud, and we have the information what we're specifically looking for. So this is just an example, again, of the information you can do as we work through the URLs that we're querying. So in order to actually view the conversations, which again, you put it in airplane mode, none of this information is stored on the device itself that we found so far. So in order to pull the conversations, again, we just add a little bit. We add our URL, we add our string to the end of it, and then we can pull our conversations. Then we can actually see that we get our actual conversations back for all of the messaging stuff from the Alexa calling and messaging feature of the device. So the other part that we can do is we can actually take the conversation ID, and actually sort essentially by contact. So this is kind of going through and saying, if I have a bunch of contacts with Sarah, for example, this is all the conversations that I'll be able to see that I've had with Sarah. So again, we have to add the specifically URLs to make this happen. We append the messages count 100 and sort it so we can actually see the most recent ones. So in order to actually see these messages like that, we do our URL, and there is an actually nicely formatted JSON, again, of the actual conversation that we can go through and pull off the individual conversations. So the one thing to note for now is right now, we're only allowed to pull the last 100 messages. Amazon probably stores all of the messages at some point. We haven't been able to confirm that with them. I would say they probably do. However, from the actual API, which again, we're just doing the API queries. We're not trying to do anything that would again, make Amazon unhappy. So we can pull the 100 off. Again, you have to have login, you have to have the credentials to actually log in and get this application. And the one thing that we'll say, which is just kind of a common theme, is when security issues are found, when issues of any kind are found, like all of this is subject to change. Because Amazon could say, you know what, like we have to stop doing this, and all of this way to pull this information back could completely change. However, it probably won't, because we're using the API, which is how they actually generate their data. So even if it does change, it might just be like a change with the URL or something like that, but this probable methodology of pulling this information back probably will still work no matter what. So we can see all of the devices that are synced to the account. Again, we just browse to the API, we have a device, and this is all of our Alexa devices. Again, everything is JSON, it's kind of a common theme. All the information that comes back from the Amazon stuff is all going to be in a nicely formatted JSON format. course, you know, there we have our customer ID. We have all kinds of interesting stuff. We can see we can see the SSID from the wireless network. All this information we can pull back from the Amazon cloud about our stuff. So we have our model, we have our serial number, we have the customer ID, you have all this information. So let's say again, law enforcement on an active case, you can actually say that this particular Amazon Echo device was associated with this account just from this information. So it's, you know, just like the old days of tracking somebody's phone with like an IMEI or anything like that, you want to make sure that the devices that you seize are actually associated with that person, that they didn't run out to Target and buy a whole bunch of Echoes and just threw them in the house and be like, hey, come on and grab all my stuff, and there's nothing actually there. So the cards feature is kind of interesting. You can only see the cards on the website for right now, and I'm not exactly sure why that is, but when you view it on the website, the cards are incredibly nicely formatted. JSON is obviously a whole bunch of information that is not nearly as pretty as you're looking at from the website, but again, you can parse all this information out, and you can actually rebuild the actual cards that you can see of the information that Alexa is actually storing. The Wi-Fi configs is a feature that we've gone back and forth with Amazon a little bit on. So this is where I guess the I am fine dog started to kind of rear his head a little bit. He didn't appear all the way, like the fire didn't get up all the way, but this is where it kind of like, what exactly are we getting into now? So this is a fantastic feature because essentially you're able to save your Wi-Fi credentials to your Amazon accounts. That way when you buy future Amazon devices, they can all automatically connect to your wireless network. That is fantastic from a user perspective because essentially you get a new device, you plug it in, everything's ready to go, you're all set. However, there is an issue because as we've all worked in the field for a considerable length of time, anytime that you see plain text password, something's just bad. Like it rubs you the wrong way. So this is no longer, actually PeacockNet is completely down. The password is no longer valid. So if you see PeacockNet, you can try to log into this password, but it's not my network anymore, so I have no idea what it is. But you can literally actually make the proper query from Amazon, and you can actually pull back SSID and password information in plain text. And if you want to use that power for good, or for evil, I wouldn't recommend it. Just try to use your powers for mostly good. But again, it's an issue that we brought up with Amazon, and they oddly enough were okay with this because it was working the way that they wanted to. So again, you know, we're just two little minions from the future who came back and trying to save everybody from the eventual Skynet stuff. And if Amazon's okay with it, like all hail Overlord Jeff, and whatever they want, we're good to go. So we can actually see other devices in the home. So obviously one of the main things that we have for Alexa is smart home devices. So you want to control your lights. You want to control your TV. You want to have smart locks. You want to have whatever smart stuff you want. One of the main reasons for Alexa is to actually connect these IoT devices to it. So you can actually use the URL, and you can pull back all the devices that are actually synced essentially with that Amazon account. So all the devices that the Echo can see, all of the synced Alexa, you can pull all that information back so you can see all the smart home devices. In my house, I want to say I have maybe 23 or so, mostly light bulbs, some outlets, a couple of switches now, and some newer stuff that is actually not in this presentation. But it's all of this information you can pull back. So again, if you're working an active case, it's so weird, but sometimes you might, if you say you need all the internet connected devices in the house, you're gonna have to get up there and unscrew light bulbs and pull them out too. That's unfortunately where we are now. So the other thing is, another thing is the activities. So regardless of the device where it originated from, you can see the actual last activities that occurred. So Amazon currently limits it to 50. With our URL query, we actually set it to 100 just in case they decide to do that. But the one thing of note here is you can tell Alexa to do something on your phone. You can tell it to do something on your Fire TV remote. You can tell it to do it on your tablet. You can tell it to do it on any actual device where Alexa is enabled. So regardless of where it actually comes from, all of it's sorted under the activities. So that's one caveat that I want to say is just if you're pulling this information and you see activities, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was done on the phone or done on the tablet. It could be done on any actual Alexa-enabled device. And again, obviously, we have JSON data that you can pull back and format and parse and clean up and make pretty and all of that fun stuff. So there are other URLs that we have found to pull information and pull data. One that we specifically did not talk about is the actual Alexa recordings. You can pull the Alexa recordings from the cloud. However, depending on the state that you're in, there may be some legal ramifications to doing that because it may be actually considered legally as private communication, which is not discoverable and all that stuff. So we specifically did not bring that up. It's easy enough to find if you really want to find it, but again, we're trying to stay on the side of mostly good and not mostly evil at all. Like, we're trying to stay on that line and not very over any more than we have to. So again, there are more URLs, there are more stuff you can pull back, but this is just kind of the methodology that we wanted to share of how you're going to need to pull this information back in the event that you're looking at these particular devices. Oh, and there we go. So shifting a little bit from the Amazon piece is the TP-Link side. So TP-Link is actually the vendor that I use for all of my products, and the main reason why is that you don't need a hub to run their products. Essentially, you plug them in, you can control them from their application, and everything is good to go with the network, so you're just set and fantastic. So that's the main reason why I went with TP-Link, so I didn't have to spend more money to buy a hub and do everything like that. So this is just an example of the kasa application. Obviously, you can control the devices. Everything is uniquely named. You can set up scenes. You can do all of that stuff within the actual application itself. TP-Link is very different than Amazon, and they store a bunch of information locally on the phone. So again, if you have a smart home, you can look for all of this. It's obviously a fairly straightforward folder name. Obviously, databases is somewhere that most of us as investigators are going to look, and it's SQLite data, which is a really big surprise because most mobile phones, we all know, never store anything in SQLite databases. So it was a really big surprise to actually find something called databases and have a whole bunch of information in SQLite. So we browsed the databases folder, and oddly enough, there was one database in particular which should jump out to everybody. It's like, I think if I'm going to look anywhere, I'm going to look in something called IoT1.db because I'm pretty sure I'm going to get some good information from there. So we pull it back, we start to look through it. The actual format of it is at least 8 tables, and the reason that we say at least 8 is because, again, we're trying to account for application updates and everything like that. As of right now, it is 8 tables. They're all fairly straightforward names, so you can actually go through and figure out what information you want to pull. So we can look for the accounts, and we can see some stuff. So this is where the I am fine dog fire started to pop up, unfortunately, a little more highly. So we saw the plain text wireless passwords. Now, unfortunately, hopefully everybody doesn't use the same password for everything, which we know never happens, but my actual password is saved in plain text in the database for this particular device. So now I can take the Amazon data, I can take the TP-Link data, and if you reuse my passwords, like, now I can get on your network and I can literally do anything that I want to do. Not just control your stuff. Anything that you want to do on the network, you have all the information for all of that now. So again, this is no longer my password. It was for the purpose of this presentation. However, we'll get into it a little bit. Like, both Amazon and TP-Link have been fantastic with this, and as of yesterday, this is no longer the case. So you may have older data that is actually stored in this way, but as if you're actually updating the application itself, this no longer happens anymore. So again, I bet a table called devices is probably going to have a whole bunch of device information, and sure enough, it does. It has the MAC address, the day it was created, all this information on the actual devices that the TP-Link application can actually access. Again, like I said, I have a bunch. I have a bunch in my house, primarily to generate as much data as possible, so that way we can actually get up and fairly comfortably talk about the amount of information that we're able to see. So obviously, there's a bunch of information. You can see the signal strength, you can see all that. So essentially, again, with the wireless information, you could probably map out within the house just based off the signal strength, kind of like where the Wi-Fi router is, where all of that information is. Like, you can actually kind of like rebuild essentially kind of the structure of somebody's house just from the information in this database. Again, most of us will probably never do that, but if you're bored on a weekend and drunk and poking around, like, hey, like, I just want to see if I can figure out like the signal strength of my house and where to put something, they've already generated all the data for you, so it's fantastic. The locations database was a little interesting. So it is exactly what you think. It's the actual location. However, it's the geographic coordinates of where the account was. We're not exactly sure how this is generated yet, where it actually is. But I will say, when I put in the coordinates, because none of these devices are GPS enabled, it's probably based off the phone, I would guess. However, since it's not required to run on a phone, so it can run on a Wi-Fi tablet, it's actually probably based off the ISP information somehow. But putting them into an actual map, it's pretty darn close to where my house actually is. I was very surprised by the level of accuracy just based off the location data from the application itself. Like, it's not perfect, but you know, it's close enough for horseshoes and hand grenades. It's good enough. It's not quite there, but it's pretty darn good. So as we said, we are working on trying to get all the information to parse this out and make this as easy as possible. Next week, when the Echo Show comes out, all of that's going to change because now we have to pull out video files, we have to pull out audio files. We're going to be able to pull back Amazon Prime Video streaming. We're going to have so much more information that we're going to have to pull out. Like, we honestly got to the point, it's like, it's not even worth it to start looking at scripts to actually parse this data because everything is probably going to change in a week, and then we have to drop all of our work and restart everything all over again. So we're working on it. We're more than willing to talk to anybody who wants to find more information about it. Like, we absolutely will talk to you. However, we don't have any scripts yet. We're getting there, we promise. But if there is anything in specific that anybody has questions or anything on, like I said, we'll talk to you during question time. We'll talk to you afterwards. I mean, she's here for a few more days. I'm here for a few more days. Like, we're going to be around for sure. But the other reason was we found lots of security issues. So again, the I am fine dog reared his head. So obviously, we have account credentials in plaintext passwords. That is a problem that was a problem from the Kasa security app. So literally anybody, wherever they were in the world, could log in with your Kasa application and they can control all of your stuff. There's no email that said another person had logged in your account. There's no notification. Literally, if somebody gets your credentials, they could log in and do whatever they wanted to your smart house. Like, that was a problem. And Stacy's been fantastic. She actually was doing a lot of the testing in Chicago, which is how I know that somebody could remotely control my stuff. It was a little freaky at times when like the light bulb just starts going on and off. It's like, damn it, Stacy, stop. Like stop doing that. Like, just leave my stuff alone for a while. But again, thank you so much for all of the work that you did with that. So the other thing that we found was initially you didn't even have to be logged into the Kasa application to actually control the devices. You just had to be on the same wireless network. That was it. You had to be on an encrypted wireless network. It won't let you connect to an open network. But if you were on the same network, all you had to do was open the application and you could control all the devices. The app automatically goes through and finds all the TP-Link devices that are actually on the network, so it does all the network scanning for you automatically. All you have to do is literally open the application on the network and you can see what TP-Link devices are there. And just by opening the application, you can control them. TP-Link has been fantastic throughout all of this, and actually yesterday, their app update is specifically addressing our two issues with the plaintext security credentials and the login account. So essentially the takeaway from this is when you're at your family reunion, that little son of a bitch, Timmy, who's always doing random stuff with his mobile phone, he can't download the app and just randomly control all the shit anymore. Like, take it, Timmy. Like, that's fantastic. So, again, like, it was kind of weird going through all of this. It's like, this is actually, I think, the first time that we've done research where, like, literally, like, the application update was literally because of the stuff that we did. And it was, obviously, these weren't terrible life-threatening issues. Potentially life-threatening issues that we're going to get into with the Amazon stuff. But it was nice to see that, you know, with all the focus on IoT security and everything like that, like the companies are actually responsive and willing and able to actually try to work to make their applications better and perform in a much better format. So again, I can't say enough good stuff about what TP-Link has been doing. Like, they've been fantastic throughout all of this. We're trying to make everything better, trying to balance that fine line between usability and security, which obviously is really, it's important for an IoT company. We're focusing on a security side. Like, while we would love everything to be as secure as possible, we know that's not possible because if it's as secure as possible, it's not usable. So again, they have been fantastic through all of that, and I can't thank, we can't thank TP-Link enough for the stuff that they've been doing for this. And then we get to Amazon and Alexa. So the calling and messaging feature, we found almost nothing at all security-wise until calling and messaging hit. And if you follow me on Twitter, you know that we had some issues with that right off the way. So one of the things that was noticed fairly early on is that a woman, I believe in North Carolina, said that she couldn't block any of the contacts. So that's pretty straightforward. Like, if you don't want contacts in your Alexa account, just don't have the contacts in your phone. Like, that's straightforward. But if you don't do that, you would think that there'd be a way to block contacts. And unfortunately, there was not. However, that really wasn't an issue. I mean, it's not that big of an issue compared to what we found when we had our dumpster fire happen. So fortunately, the WannaCry ransomware, or unfortunately for those affected by it, happened while we were finding this. So fortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of time for people to try to do bad things with the stuff that we found. So it's weird that ransomware worked out well, but in this case, I think it actually worked out well to keep people away from a certain thing until they could work on getting fixes in place. So this was literally my tweet when I found what I found, and I had my holy shit, this is horrible moment. We reached out to them, and within an hour, we were actually talking to the Amazon security team with what we had found. So it's kind of weird again, and Stacy actually is the one who brought all this light, because how we stumbled upon this was my test device was a Galaxy Note 2, and it was not compatible with the new version of the app with the calling and messaging. So I was like, well, I want to make sure that it works, so I signed into my phone, and I actually had Stacy sign in with the Peacock credentials to her phone just to see what would happen. So again, ease of convenience, user interaction, all of that good stuff, like it makes sense from a customer perspective. The very first time you sign in, and only the very first time, you get an SMS message to your phone, to the number you associate with the account, and that is the only time that there's any kind of authentication to it. So all it takes is one time, and automatically your account is now synced, your phone is now synced with the Alexa account, and you can pull the calling and messaging and all that features from your phone. So if you have the credentials, you can log into any device that actually has the app installed to it. So what this means is you could make Alexa calls as another person. You could receive Alexa calls being sent to another person. You could send messages as another person. You literally could be NSA to all of the Alexa stuff without anybody even knowing. Like you could literally man in the middle anything. Like you could, and all of it, the worst thing was there was no way for the user to actually know that somebody else had even signed into your account. So from kind of this, from the safety perspective, let's say you had a couple who were together who shared an Amazon account and they had a horrible breakup, and maybe even like there's a restraining order now against the guy or something like that. He could log in to the Amazon, the Alexa account, sync the information, and actually could see all the messages that are being sent, receive all the phone calls, all of that information. It could do all of that, and there was no way for the user to know. So at this point, it very much shifted from a security issue to like, this is an actual like public safety issue, which is why we were so concerned. Like, the last thing that we wanted to have happen is somebody take the research that we're doing and use it for really, really, really bad. Like, it's all fun and games, like hack Wi-Fi passwords and everything like that. But I mean, this was actually potentially like life-threatening stuff that we had to bring up to Amazon. And again, they were fantastic with it. They worked really hard on trying to get some of the fixes. But unfortunately, once this information was out, we knew that people would potentially take it and use it for bad. So that's why we didn't talk about anything that we found specifically with the calling and messaging stuff in any of the talks that we did beforehand. We just said that we found some stuff with Alexa and went through there. So sure enough, when I did the call, or calling the Peacock account, my test phones both rang. Stacy's phone in Chicago rang. My Echo rang. All of that rang, and had no idea that it was even honestly actually signed in on other devices. So the only way that I knew that something happened is there's a very, very quick message that flashes up to say the call was answered on another device. That is it. There is no, it was answered from your third iPhone or answered from the living room Echo Dot. There was nothing like that. Just very quickly, something flashed, and that was the extent of it. The other thing that we noticed is that all of the contacts automatically replicate across devices. So let's say you're signed in on a device. It will automatically scan through your phone, looking through the contacts, and any contacts that it finds, it will now sync with your Amazon or Alexa contacts. It doesn't matter what phone it's in. It doesn't even matter if it's associated with that account. Whatever device it signs into last will search through the contacts, and any of them that have the phone number associated with the Alexa account will actually sync across all of the contacts. So even enabling two-factor authentication did not change that, because once you were in the application, you were good to go. There's no forced logout after you enable two-factor authentication. So essentially, if somebody had already logged into your Alexa or the Amazon account, you had no way of knowing, and unfortunately, there was no way to force them out afterwards initially, and then we found some we found some ways to do that. The other thing that we had, the big concerns with Amazon, was obviously the Wi-Fi configs. Like, while we understand, again, why it all works, by default, Amazon will save your network information to the Alexa application, to all of their stuff, so you can sign in across the devices. So we had big concerns, obviously, because the plain text SSID and password. Again, it's an issue that we still feel is a pretty big one, and Amazon seems to kind of say that that's working how it's supposed to, so again, that's their call. However, we did find out that you can remove the actual credentials from the account by calling them up initially, and then we found that you can actually do it from the browser. So if you're concerned that you actually have wireless networks or wireless information saved on the Amazon account, you can actually just browse to the site, delete all this password, or delete all the saved network information, and then it will actually clear it all out and you're good to go. However, the information does still get saved on the Echo devices. However, it's actually encrypted and protected and everything like that. So it's not just in plain text waiting there, but it is actually saved on the devices even if you delete it from the actual web-facing interface. So Amazon released an Echo update actually I think it was about a week ago. Again, they've been fantastic through all of this as well, but they, I think, are actually taking more of a bigger picture where they're trying to balance the usability features of the calling and messaging feature, especially since they actually have a product coming out next week which entirely focuses around the calling and messaging features. So again, we kind of put them in a hard position because it's like, this stuff would be fantastic to fix, but it's hard to fix it because it's already out there and they feel that it's working the way that it is. So we did what we could, we brought it up to them, and they're the ones making decisions on the way they're going to go forward with the issues that we found. So our kind of future plans, and you want to?
Sure. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some iOS devices to testing so that we can go ahead and test that side because we did only test Android devices. We do have an Amazon show will be arriving at my house on the 28th. Something of note, TP-Link is actually now enrolled both of us in their beta testing program, and we're both receiving hardware from them. So we're now testing for TP-Link pre-release. We're actually going to write the scripts after we get through the data on the show to actually parse this data. And we should have that done. We think we'll have it done before OSDF, so that voting's open. So please vote for our talk because we'd love to be able to share that research. So we're going to do some real robust testing with the Echo show. I can't wait to find that darn fox that keeps scatting in front of my house. And I won't shoot it, I promise. I know I've got an LBV on, but. And then we're going to continue to work with both Amazon and TP-Link to make sure that the applications are working securely and safely, at the same time figuring out where the data is for the forensics purposes. We have plans to meet with Amazon at DEF CON, so I mean, they have really been fantastic. And despite being from the future, we could not bring back our test results yet from the future. So in summary, the data is pretty much primarily stored in the cloud. There is some information that you can get off the application. The timestamps are in some of those URLs that we didn't discuss because that's pretty common knowledge. But there's very, very little that's available offline because it's constantly syncing to the device. Based on what we saw on the hardware, the Amazon Echo, and the fact that we had the 24-hour storage of the voice messaging, we are hopeful that we'll find some more physical stuff on the hardware on the show. The exciting thing is when I started this research, I really wasn't finding much at all, so it's exciting to see as they're adding more and more is being stored on the hardware itself. There's a lot of useful information in the secondary applications that control your smart home, like kasa TP-Link application, and we expect, based on the API, that a lot of the skills will also store a robust amount of data, most likely in SQLite databases. Account credentials are all you need up until yesterday to be able to pretty much control a smart home or being just on the network. But again, thanks to TP-Link for changing that stuff immediately. The skills probably are going to have a lot of good data. I can't wait to dig into some of those. And I cannot stress how awesome it was to work with both the security teams and their responsiveness. The fact that they were in contact and responded back to us within hours, that they took time to do phone calls with us, the fact that we're meeting with some of these people in person, it really is fantastic how much they've listened and chosen to take action and put out updates. So, you know, the question is Alexa Skynet? Not yet. And the other point here is, I don't know if you guys can see it in the image, but we kind of were trying, or Brian in his great photoshopping was trying to kind of capture the future here with the drone delivery, as well as the fact that we've got cloud data, we've got hardware data, and we've got app data, right? Alexa apps on the brain there. And really to get the full picture of everything, we feel like you need access to all three. And that's really the only full way that you get the full picture of what's going on here.